right. So for those of you who I haven't met, my name is Ariel Sutherland. I am the Director of Compliance Products here at Risk Exec. I'm joined by my colleague, Sarah Bruns, who leads our CRA, Community Development and Small Business Lending Section 1071 Solutions here at Risk Exec. Now, community development is truly her area of expertise with experience spanning bank examination, CRA program development, and a number of industry engagements. So she'll be leading a majority of today's discussion and sharing some practical insights on how institutions can prepare for 2026. Now, before we do jump in, just a couple of housekeeping items here I wanted to share. Today's session is being recorded, and we'll send both a copy of the recording and the presentation slides to all registered attendees following this webinar. So if you miss anything or you need to step away for a minute, or would like to just share some of this content with a colleague afterwards, you'll have access to everything. We are scheduled for about 30 minutes of content, followed by 15 minutes of live Q&A. So please submit your questions throughout our presentation using the Q&A feature, or discuss among yourselves using the chat. We will be monitoring both of them as they come in and address as many as we can during the Q&A portion. Now, if we don't get to your questions live, a member of the Risk Exec team will follow up afterwards to get those questions answered for you. And if we don't receive many questions, or if we move through things a little bit ahead of schedule, we may end a few minutes early. Now, moving into kind of what we are going to be discussing here today is our session is focused on community development strategies for 2026, especially as that CRA regulatory framework continues to evolve. As many of you know, the 2023 CRA Final Rule included provisions with a January 1st, 2026 applicability date. So since then, the OCC, the Federal Reserve, and the FDIC have proposed rescinding that rule and reinstating the 1995 framework. That rescission really hasn't been finalized yet, so many institutions are operating in this period of transition and a bit of uncertainty. But the one thing that has not changed under either of these frameworks is the documentation. Examiners continue to evaluate community development activities based on evidence of CRA purpose, geographic alignment, and benefit to low and moderate income individuals or areas. So regardless of where this rulemaking lands, strong documentation is going to remain one of the most defensible positions an institution can take in their next exam. So with that in mind, we do have a pretty packed agenda here for today, and we'll move through 5 primary areas. Now, the first piece here, Sarah's going to set the stage for us with the current regulatory picture and what it may mean for some of your upcoming exams. Then she's going to walk through that 1995 Community Development Framework, including the 4 qualifying categories and types of documentation institutions should be prepared to maintain. From there, we'll look at some common documentation gaps that tend to surface during exams and the corrective steps that can help close those gaps. And then we'll also talk about the operational shift from managing community development in spreadsheets or across different systems to treating your community development records as a year-round discipline and documenting those year-round. And then finally, we are going to spend some time looking at Risk Exec's community development module and how it can help support this process through centralized records, dashboards, and exam-ready reporting. At the end, we will have that Q&A session, as I mentioned, about 15 minutes worth. So please continue to submit your questions throughout using that Q&A section of the webinar. So with that, Sarah, I'll turn the stage over to you to get started.
Thanks so much, Ariel. And so nice to be here. So nice to see so many of you have joined us today. It probably is meaningful to take some time here and just kind of talk about where we're at with the CRA and all of the regulatory kind of change and upheaval that we've seen over the last couple of years. So we thought it would be fair to just take a little bit of time on the history, and that'll help kind of refocus our discussion here today. So as we know, there's been that conversation for a long time now about modernizing the Community Reinvestment Act. And a couple of years ago, in 2023, we saw finally a joint agency proposal or joint agency final rule. So in October 2023, we had a final rule And it had provisions that were applicable 2026 and going forward. Ultimately, though, there were changes there. There was a lot of, I think there were certainly some parts that folks didn't like and various entities didn't like. So the agencies made an announcement last year, so in March of 2025, made that announcement of the intent to rescind. So this is kind of a process. Of course, they have to make that announcement. Then there actually has to be that notice of proposed rulemaking to rescind, which we actually saw come out in July of last year. So we're sitting here now a year later, still haven't seen that official rescission, but we do recognize that that final rule that we knew of in October of 2023 is ultimately going to be rescinded. So we're sitting here today, it's not yet rescinded. All of us obviously still have exams to focus on, processes to keep in order, and programs to keep running. So the big picture that we want to focus on today, obviously, is that we want to talk about community development today, talk about that documentation that's needed, because even with all this upheaval and change, you still need exam documentation and record keeping that holds up under any framework. Obviously, we're going to spend our time on the 1995 framework, but really what we'll talk about here today is going to be applicable regardless of these rule changes and what we see in the future. So I'm going to go to our next slide that's obviously going to highlight the standards, and we're going to talk through some of the expectations related to documentation. So we had that poll question at the beginning of our webinar where we talked about, or we asked you, what is the most difficult community development purpose that you find most difficult to document for exams. And looking at those results, it was pretty close actually between revitalization and stabilization. So most folks, 43%, said revitalization and stabilization, but economic development was right behind it at 36%. So let's talk through it a little bit. What makes these purposes kind of so difficult, or where are the challenges? As it relates to things like affordable housing. So obviously with affordable housing, we're talking about housing. You have to demonstrate that you're providing housing for LMI individuals. I think with affordable housing, this can be fairly straightforward. So you might have loans or investments with low-income housing tax credit projects or properties that have an affordable and stated set aside. That can make that a very straightforward process. But affordable housing can also be based on other circumstances. And we know the Q&A kind of walks through how to make that case that housing is also being provided to LMI individuals and populations. But either way, you've got to be able to support that case through the stated information in an agreement or loan memo, or you've got to be able to put that narrative together around the other facts and circumstances. Of course, next up, we have community services. I think what makes community services really interesting is you have to focus on both the purpose of the activity. So community service are those things like healthcare, education, social services. The Q&A does a great job of walking through some very specific examples. If you're kind of wondering, is this type of activity we're working in a qualifying community service? And then the other side of it, of course, is making sure that, again, LMI individuals are benefited. So that might be statements from the organization you're working with. It might be evidence from some other, application or grant program that you've worked with that organization on. But you always want to make that case connecting the population served to the area income that you're comparing it to. Next up, of course, we have economic development. So the CRA and the question and answers talks a lot about the size and purpose test, which can be both revenue-based, or you can go into the SBA size standards and look at whether or not an activity meets the size test. And then purpose, of course, is that permanent job creation, retention, and improvement for LMI individuals. Again, this is one where folks said this could be a more difficult purpose to document. Something to keep in mind here is, especially if you're working with a borrower or you're looking at your loan portfolio, your loan memo might have helpful information, or I know some institutions even have a practice of collecting some additional CRA related information in the origination process or in the application process when their lenders are working with businesses. But keep in mind, size and purpose tests are obviously what you need on economic development. And then lastly, revitalize and stabilize, which was noted as the most difficult by folks on this call to document. And revitalize and stabilize is unique in that you're working to make that case that activity that you have participated in is attracting and retaining businesses and residents to LMI geographies, designated disaster areas, or distressed or underserved non-metropolitan middle-income geographies. So it sounds straightforward, but with these cases, obviously you want to make sure you're showing that attracting businesses and residents, but oftentimes you also have to connect to some sort of city or official government plan. I think that even the rigor that examiners can expect related to those plans can often vary. So that's understandably why this one can be a more difficult purpose to document. I want to talk a little bit about up next here, just about where we can have gaps in documentation. So we've laid out a few here based on our experience and some of the interaction we've had with our clients. I bet as you all on this call are thinking through this, there's probably others that come to mind for you, but we wanted to kind of put them together. So as you think about where you could have gaps, one of those big ones is, of course, purpose. So you really need to going back to, again, those four purposes, you need to demonstrate that what you're doing actually connects to one of those qualifying purposes. This is a great place where CRA officers and community development officers really become students of the question and answers and understand those examples and how their activity connects to those things. Another area where there can be gaps are in the geography benefited. So of course, it's very important to demonstrate that your activity benefits a particular geography. Ideally, it's probably your assessment areas or that broader statewide or regional area. But you want to make sure you're collecting that evidence that identifies the specific counties or other geographies that are benefited, and you've got that spelled out and retained in your documentation. Another gap or certainly a gap that comes up is that LMI benefit. So you want to be able to demonstrate that the beneficiaries and their income is connected to that median family income figure. A lot of times an institution will go through that process of kind of walking through the calculation, like the beneficiaries have this income or lower, and this is how it compares to median family income. Another one, of course, is document storage. So we'll get a chance as we get into the risk exec tool today to show you the attachment capability in our product. But document storage is a really important part of the community development story and program. You need to have the supporting documentation that supports all these topics that we've talked through. So you want to make sure that it's well organized, that it's obviously can be located, and it can be looked through very efficiently by someone who might be unfamiliar with your process, like an exam team. And then there's, of course, classification consistency. So you might have different team members working on different segments of community development. You certainly want to make sure that you've taken the same approach when there are obvious similarities with your activity. So again, the handful of gaps, there's probably others out there that you can think of, but all important factors to think through as you're managing your CRA and community development programs.
Thank you, Sarah.
I'll hand it over. Yeah.
So in this next section, we're really going to pivot here a little bit more towards that operational side of community development management and the cost of relying on reactive documentation processes. So you alluded a little bit to this, documentation gaps and not having kind of that single location here. And honestly, I think many of you have probably experienced this in your careers in some form or another. But an exam gets scheduled and suddenly, everyone's trying to pull together all sorts of documentation for a number of different years to support your community development activity. And that's when, the spreadsheet comes out or the dashboard or the report is all pulled out and everyone starts to dig through the documentation to ensure you can dot your I's and cross your T's. So someone may be, digging through shared files or emails, or someone may inevitably remember what happened with a community development activity, but doesn't know where to find the documentation to support indicating that it was a qualified activity. That's what it means to be reactive, right? To have this reactive documentation cycle. And the challenge here isn't that institutions are not doing the community development work. The challenge is proving that it was done consistently and effectively and efficiently when that time of examination arrives. And we tend to really see three common issues here that surface during that exam cycle. And the first are activities are not classified consistently. So one person may have classified something one way, another may have classified it differently. And over time, that can help or promotes an inconsistent story that is shared during your exam. The second is that supporting documentation lives somewhere else and not attached to the actual community development activity. The activity is in that spreadsheet or in that system, but the evidence of the activity is in that shared drives, in an email folder, or maybe even saved on someone's desktop. And when examiners ask for you to start to support or ask for that support, finding everything now becomes this really manual process or this mad dash at the end. And that's the third piece here is the scramble, right? Instead of spending your time discussing the impact of your community development program, your teams are now spending weeks hunting down the documentation or rebuilding records to support your activity. And the reality is none of these are really compliance problems. They're more procedural or process problems. And a system of record here really changes that by having your documentation part of the process rather than a project that happens right before examination. So when activities are documented as they occur, your supporting evidence can stay attached to those records and the history can be maintained seamlessly over time. And that's really the goal here. And that's moving from that reactive documentation workflow to a year-round discipline. So building on that idea, in our next slide, let's talk about that year-round discipline and what that actually looks like in practice. So when documentation becomes part of that day-to-day, instead of something that you scramble to assemble during your exam, the entire approach to CD management starts to really shift and change. A system of record is not just a place you can store the information, it can help you find and ensure that that correct information is captured at the point of entry in a consistent way year-round. And there are really four key things you want to have maintained in this system. First is that CRA purpose qualification. This means that when the activity is entered, the person documenting can also select that category, write your purpose description, and tying that activity back to any of the qualifying criteria that may apply. And the important part is that this happens when the activity actually occurs, when it's fresh in everyone's mind, not months or years later, when everyone's trying to remember, why did this actually qualify or what area did this benefit? Now, Sarah, I'd love for you to jump in here for a moment. And from your experience, how important is it to keep all of this kind of tied together as you go through the exam process?
Yeah, thanks, Ariel. I think, even just thinking back to your prior slide and talking about some of those best practices, there's so much that you can learn from exam to exam, but some of it can be very painful. So, of course, we're sharing this information so that ideally, you're not learning some of these things the hard way. But I think just in each one of the things that are listed on this slide in particular, it is so critical because this is really what makes those exams go smoothly for you and allows you to hopefully tell your story about the community development and community reinvestment that you've done in your communities versus worrying about, are we going to get this counted, or are we going to get this counted in the place where we wanted it to be counted? I think if you took each one of these boxes, each one of these can be applied to, each one should be applied to your process. So you do have consistency, not just year over year, but also across whether it's loans, investments, or services. And ideally, when you're starting small, so as your processes scale, you've ensured that consistency across the board. But hopefully you're not learning it all the hard way, but certainly some of these things can come up and, you learn a lesson about maybe the documentation you should keep or how you need to, outline assessment area assignment and, but either way, making sure that you're doing it consistently across all those types and year over year is so critical.
Great, thank you. No, that's good advice here. Yeah, so you touch on this a little bit with, assessment area assignment, and again, making sure that is captured at the point of entry. It makes a much smoother examination process down the line. The third piece, again, is the documentation being attached to the record, so you're not having to search for it throughout multiple different systems. or relying on key individuals who may not be in the office or are unavailable to assist. And then lastly, too, it helps you to create really that multi-year history, right? Exams are not typically focused on a single year. They span multiple years. So having that part of that year-round process so that when you do get to your exam cycle, it's not that mad dash or that scramble can be extremely, extremely valuable. So the good news is everything that we've really covered here, all of the points we see here on the slide, the CRA purpose classification, assessment area assignment, multi-year, and documentation. These are all elements that are embedded within RiskExec's community development module. So Sarah, I think I'm going to turn it back over to you here to pull up our module and start walking through a bit of a live demo here with everyone on the call.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to stop sharing our slides and I will be pulling up RiskExec. So hopefully, Ariel, you can give me that signal that lets me know you're seeing that as well.
I think it's still loading. There we go. Yep, we can see RiskExec now.
Okay, perfect. Well, for those of you who've joined us today who are a RiskExec client, hopefully this interface looks familiar to you. And those of you who might not have seen our platform before, RiskExec is essentially a module-based environment. So we have modules that support all of the concepts that you're seeing on the screen. I'm going to talk today about our community development capability and obviously what we offer here. And you'll also get to see some of our dashboarding capability while we're here, which has also been recently released. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our module. And everything that you'll see here today on the screen is live and in production and has subscribing users. So we have users already using our community development module. We've continued to develop and will continue to release updates to this module, but everything you're seeing here is live. I have demo data in our system that allows me to kind of give a picture of what a financial institution's data could really look like in our module. My dashboard here today, for instance, focuses on community development loans, services, and investments. And I am using we were talking about multi-year just a moment ago. We have the ability on our dashboards to show multiple years or multiple files of the same data type in a chart. So in the case of this chart here in the third row, I'm able to show my, for instance, 2025 community development loans in comparison to my 2026 community development loans based on their qualifying purpose. So I can start to get an idea, how am I doing this year compared to last year, or even I could obviously have a couple of years there as well. With our dashboarding capability, you also can just get an understanding of the health and content of your file. So I've been talking about that year-round discipline. Across the top here, I'm using what are called file boxes, and these are giving me information about the health and content of my file. So I can tell by the dates in the file, do I have my records current? Have I brought in everything that I should by the time we're sitting here in the middle of June? Or have I completed things like my geocoding and edit checks? So I'm seeing all of that. But got a lot of features on the RiskExec dashboard. I know we'll extend an invite at the end of this as well. So if you want to have a demo and more in-depth walkthrough with our team, we're happy to share that. I'm going to go into the community development module itself, and then we'll spend a little bit of time looking at one of these data schemas and really how it supports your processes. So one thing I'll mention about our community development module is, of course, it supports management of community development loans, investments, and services. We do also have deposit capability. So another one, we're happy to take some questions about that. We know community development is separate from deposits, but we've had a fair number of clients who've been interested in working with that data more for purposes of CRA exams. But again, we have loans, investments, and services supported here. A lot of consistency across our data schemas, which again is another factor that we were just talking about. So you want to have consistent fields, you want to have a consistent approach. By having everything in the same system, you're now able to manage for that. So I'm going to go into an investment file and you'll get to see, how kind of our system is designed and set up to support management. In this case, we're going to take investments, but this applies to loans and services. With our platform, you're able to bring in your data all into one place. So right now you're looking at again, demo investment file. I have a number of different qualified investment types in here, and I've organized them in file parts. With our platform, you can bring everything into one place so that you're starting to manage for the same fields and the same approach, and you're ensuring that consistency, whether it's a small business investment company investment or a grant, you've got everything in the same place. We do have all of our geocoding and mapping tools here. So if you want to look at that data on a map, you of course have that as well. One feature I'll also highlight is our ability to offer custom edit checks. So I'm actually going to open these up so you can see these. Edit checks can help you ensure that your data is accurate and complete. So this, again, avoiding that year-end scramble and ensuring that your records are comprehensive. But edit checks can certainly help you do that. You can add edit checks that look for things like missing detail in a field. So missing website, for instance, if a website is something I value on my records, my edit checks can help look for those. Or if I want to look for something that might be anomalous in my data. So I've got an edit check here that's looking to see anything that might be a grant with a revitalized, stabilized purpose. So maybe that's kind of unusual for my activity. My edit checks can look at that. I can also use my edit checks to look for features that might support qualification or consistency in my qualification. So I wrote this edit check to look for grants with an affordable housing purpose, but missing an affordable unit percentage. So again, a lot of flexibility in the platform, but of course to make sure that you are getting consistent information on your community development records. I'm going to go into one of these file parts. I'm going to start in my grants, but again, keep in mind all of these, regardless of the file part I'm in, all of my underlying schema content is the same. So the approach that we've taken with supporting that management of data is to ensure we always have three key tabs here. So an information, a property, and a CD qualification tab. The information tab in all the data schemas ensures you've got information that's unique to that activity. So investment data is going to be unique to services, or the loan tab, of course, is going to, or investment activity is going to be unique to investments, service to service, and loans to loans. But our goal here is to give you a place to manage that information that's really important on the activity. On our property tab, this is where if you're an institution who has an address associated with your activity, you can indicate that, bringing your address in for purposes of geocoding, also getting an assessment area assigned based on the location that you've provided here. In our CD qualification tab, we also have a place for you to assign an assessment area based on geography benefited. So our system accommodates both. You can geocode an address and use that, or you can identify that location of beneficiaries and geography benefited. So it really is going to be able to be, you can use the module based on how it works for your process. But speaking to some of the things that Ariel mentioned earlier, you of course want to have that consistent approach to qualification and identifying that qualifying purpose. You have that built in across all of these, all of the data schemas. So you can ensure that your coding looks and feels the same. And when you've approached, for instance, qualification, that you've done it consistently for activities. We have provided places for the narrative as well as ability to document the impact. And indicating complex, innovative, and responsive, as well as that justification there. And then lastly, I'll mention the ability to add attachments. So you have the ability to add attachments on a record. For anything that is a PDF, it can be previewed on the screen. So I'll just open that up for purposes of our demo here. But you also can add a number of other attachment types and ensure that all of your attachments are now sitting with those records. So for purposes of exams, everything's in the same place for your activity. So with that, I think we'll go back to the slides, but happy to take, as you all might have questions or you want to see more, we'll be leaving some information for you as well.
Thanks, Sarah, for showing us the system. Awesome. All right, so we have a few questions. Let's see, which one do we want to tackle first? So a question came through relating to the CRA Final Rule, the 2023 rule, and then the previous rule. And the question was, should we prepare for both frameworks, or how does that work? So Sarah, you want to take that one?
I'm sure, happy to. So I think well, everything we've heard so far is obviously talking about reverting back to the 1995 rule. So safe, I think, to revert there. We know that the 2023 rule is going to be rescinded. There are some unique circumstances for some institutions who were OCC supervised in, I think it was around the 2020 or so timeframe and the rule that the OCC had. But for the most part, everybody is probably back to working under 1995, and I would say focus on that particular rule for any of the work that you're doing or any of the qualifying purposes that you're documenting. Ariel, I saw a question come in, and I'll grab it, related to information that might be in a loan memo. So the question here just asking our thoughts on when lending staff makes a statement in a file that seems to degrade community development. For example, a property is affordable housing that is clear and straightforward in the file, but then the lender makes a comment that the borrower is trying to remove the income restrictions, that the loan is facilitating improvements so the owner can justify higher rent. So I'll speak to this one, and I actually have had experience, particularly with circumstances like this. I would actually discourage documenting as community development a loan like this. I think it can potentially do more harm than good when it comes to documenting the support that you're offering your community. And even if it is an affordable loan at the beginning, but there's an intention to essentially turn the tenants or push the rents. So I tend to think that these can kind of create more noise in your portfolio of community development and do more harm than good. That's my it's my opinion, probably separate from risk exec. Yeah.
Yeah. Couple more popped in here. And it looks like it's more on the system functionality, Sarah, that I think maybe you can also talk to. So what type of reports are available within the community development module? I know we talked a little bit about the dashboarding and using those as a kind of baseline reporting for your different year over year. But can you talk a little bit about the reports that are available tied to each data type?
I can. Yep. So, and this would be a great one for those that are interested. Certainly reach out and we're happy to show more. So we have a standard set of reports that'll show you things like activity inside your assessment areas, as well as kind of an executive report that just tells you about the content of the file. We also have a pivot table type of report called file crosstab that allows you to kind of slice and dice your data in ways that works and makes sense for you. So for each community development type, all of those report types are available. And then we have some more specific reporting that segments in more detail things like community development loans and investments. I also highlight that with investments, that is one activity type where we see kind of a consistent format for how that data is represented in PEs. And we do support the number and amount of qualified investments with a report format in the suite of reports.
Okay. Thank you. A lot of system functionality questions here.
Yeah.
I think we maybe stick on that topic here for a second. Relating to the attachment capabilities, can we copy documentation from one loan to another? For example, same borrower, but different loan, same documentation, that sort of thing. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. At this point, no. Although kind of good capability to understand the interest in. We are building out the capability, though, to ensure consistency at the organization level. So you can take information about an organization that you've maybe qualified and ensure that it's applied to loans, investments, and services that are related to that entity. So that work is underway right now. As it relates to documentation, though, that's a kind of a one-to-one. So you bring that into the record that it is applicable to.
Do you want to talk a little bit too about the split record functionality?
Yes. Yeah. So we've had, obviously, I think everybody takes a little bit different approach to how they manage records that might benefit multiple geographies. We do have the ability to split records. I think it comes up most often on investments, but can come up on loans and lesser extent services. But in the platform, if you have something that comes in maybe as a total dollar amount when you bring it in from that source system or when you add that record, but you really actually can apply it to multiple geographies based on the separation of the dollars or by percentage. you are able to split records within the platform, and the platform does ensure, for instance, that you've allocated all the funds consistently, or also ensures that you don't make an error in that splitting process. So platform does support splitting those, and then you can identify different geographies benefited based on maybe one mortgage-backed pool that's serving multiple assessment areas.
So many of them. Trying to go through and see if we can find another good one.
Yeah, I see one related to report that shows assessment areas that lack CD loans. So there's a couple different reports related to community development loans, and some are based on assessment areas. So yes, you would be able to see geographies that don't have CD loans. It's another place where the mapping capability could assist as well. So you're able to take your loans, presuming you've got an address associated with them and you geocode them, you are able to look at them on a map and look at either whether or not they're in your assessment areas or their proximity to your assessment areas. See a couple questions on the CD module and just kind of interest in it, whether it's pricing or seeing more. So I know we'll have some detail at the end, but our team can always help with questions. That's kind of the process as far as working with you and understanding your needs, making a proposal. But yes, you're welcome to reach out to our team to talk through the CD module and options there.
I do have another question here relating to kind of prior year CD records. And is there a way that those can be brought into the Risk Exec platform today? And I can actually answer that one if you want, Sarah. So we've structured the CD module to work and function very similarly to our other data management modules. So if you're already a client, you're very used to this workflow, but you'll be able to upload any source reports in either CSV or a text file format and seamlessly import those using our dynamic import wizard. So very similar, but we can definitely, if you're interested in learning more about the module, we can talk through kind of what the scoping of that looks like and how you would do that during any follow-up conversations.
There is a question that came in around the tracking and a form to gather volunteer service from employees. So it's a great and timely question. This is capability that will be released here in this month. We will be offering essentially a link that clients will share with their employees to collect their volunteer service activity. With that link, that does not require your employees to be a Risk Exec user or have a login. They will access the link as you provide it. So our message to our users is that you'll provide that link, whether it's email or by way of an intranet site. You give the directions for what to report and when, and the records flow directly into Risk Exec for review and qualification. So for those that have asked that question, that is coming out this month. Our clients will see some communication related to that in our release notes, but I do imagine we'll have some other communication more broadly as that is released. So again, if there's if you're interested in that, certainly reach out and we'd be happy to show you that functionality.
Great. Sarah, is there any last minute ones we want to answer before we start to wrap up? I think we pretty much answered most of them.
We'll move us on to our next slide.
Great. Well, before we do go ahead and wrap up today, we did want to leave everyone with some things that they can take back to your team. 3 things to be specific. Now, the first is your documentation discipline, making sure that it holds up under any framework. So the 2023 rule, as Sarah mentioned, has not officially been rescinded, but even if it is, and when it is, the core documentation expectations remain the same. The safest approach here with regards to your documentation is to build your records that can stand under either framework. Now, the second is to close the gaps before your exam cycle opens. So today we talked a lot about the common gaps around those purpose, geography, LMI benefit, where your documentation is, your classification consistency. Each of those can be addressed now between your exam cycles rather than, discovering that there is something wrong pre-exam. And the third is a structured system of record. That's going to help to protect your CD credit year round. So records created at the time of the activity are always going to be stronger than those that are reconstructed after the fact. And the Risk Exec's community development module is really designed to help you maintain those records consistently and continuously throughout the year. So your program is exam ready, not pre-exam ready, right? So Sarah, is there anything else you want to add here before we go ahead and wrap up for today?
No, I think we can head over to the next slide and maybe talk about how our team can help here too. So, as you're interested, whether you're interested in the module or just talking more to our team about your process, feel free to reach out to, have that conversation about community development, documentation, and readiness. Our team is happy to talk through how your current processes are working and how Risk Exec can support those processes. So, I think what we of course want our clients to be successful. So we want to be able to walk through with you what you're currently doing, maybe where there are some opportunities, and of course, how the Risk Exec community development module can assist and hopefully make those upcoming exams go smoothly. So reach out. We've left that information, info@riskexec.com, or pose that question in the chat, and we'd be happy to connect with you to learn more about how you're doing things today and maybe how we can work together in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to everyone for joining us here today. We really appreciate your time and all of your participation. Again, a recording of this session and a copy of the slides will be emailed to all attendees. And if we did not get to your questions during our Q&A, a Risk Exec team member will follow up with you by email. Thank you again, and we hope to see you at our next session, and have a wonderful rest of the day, everyone.